We need to talk about ideas, good ones and bad ones. We need to learn stuff about the world. We need an honest, intelligent, thought-provoking, and entertaining review of what the hell happened on this planet in the last 7 days. We need to sit back and listen to the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Hello and welcome back, dear listener. This is the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove podcast. We're up to episode 243, if you can believe it. I, of course, am Trevor the Iron Fist. With me, nearly as always these days, is Scott the Velvet Glove, all the way via Skype from regional Queensland. Scott, how are you?
G'day, Trevor. G'day, Paul. How are you all?
All good. And also with me, of course, Paul the 12th Man here in the leafy western suburbs of Brisbane.
Hi, Trevor. Hi, Scott. Hello, listeners.
And a special guest that we have for you. If you're watching on the live stream, you'd see him in the corner there, bottom left-hand corner. Frank Jordan from,
West End.
West End, yes, Brisbane boy.
Yep.
Frank's joining us as our fourth panellist, and Frank is a candidate in the upcoming Lord Mayoral race for Brisbane. So
That's right.
So we're going to talk to Frank, dear listener, about his plans for our fair city and a bit of his life story and other things. And we'll see how we go. After that, we'll talk about our normal current affairs and other stuff, coronavirus, share market crashes, crazy things that are going on in the world. We'll get to them potentially. Depends what happens. So, well, Frank, you're a candidate for the Lord Mayor of Brisbane. Let's get some acknowledgements out. Like, we were all members of the Secular Party, and we know Frank from that. So
Yes, that's right.
we met many years ago in a little library room at Brisbane City Council, and we'd sit around solving the problems of the world, much like we are right now and continue to do.
It's great meeting in a library.
Yeah. So, Frank, why? Why would you
Run for mayor.
Yes.
It's basically because it's a social justice issue. A lot of my friends are living in fear. They use cannabis as a medicine, and I think there's at least 1 million people in Australia that are doing that. And they're in fear of having armed police and vicious dogs knocking on their door any time of the night and day. They're not going to have... there'll be financial penalties. They might have to go to jail. Their friends, the social stigma. And I think that's just so unfair. People should have access to medicine. And I ran as a candidate for the Hemp Party, mainly because I don't actually use cannabis. And they had a bit of trouble getting candidates because they get harassed by the police if they actually use cannabis.
Ah, right, yep.
And as a clean skin, I could stand and not worry.
So when you say they get harassed, you mean the police are searching them or something?
They'll
Or
come around. If they're actually using cannabis as medicine,
Yes.
the police will come around and confiscate the medicine and charge them with possession.
Right. And have they come around to your place sort of looking to see if you are using it, or have you felt any harassment at all?
No, because I'm pretty well known for my non-use of most drugs.
Right, yep. And you've got a friend who's particularly suffering, is that right?
Yes, Deb Lynch, the president of the Medical Cannabis Users Group of Australia, she was raided. She had to go to court. They were going to say she's a criminal. She's been fighting that court case for at least a year now, and she's quite ill. She might even eventually die from her illness, and it's just shockingly cruel to make her go to court to defend herself. And if she loses, she'll be punished. It's just not right.
Heart of gold, Frank. So we're going to go through your policies. You've got about half a dozen of them there. But number one policy, when I looked through your Facebook page, was policy number one, open a medical cannabis clinic in City Hall. And you say here, I will open a medical cannabis clinic in City Hall, and council will have its own cannabis farm to provide affordable prescriptions. Unfortunately, patients are still banned from growing their own plants, forcing them to buy horrendously expensive corporate products. Without affordable and accessible medical cannabis, the government will just keep spending millions of taxpayer dollars to build bigger prisons and lock up the sick and the vulnerable. I suspect this would be the first council cannabis farm to ever operate in the world, or am I wrong on that one, Frank?
There might be some in other countries. But yeah, in Australia it'll be the first one. There are cannabis farms at this very moment, but the legalities is just it's really difficult to do, and you have to be a corporation basically, and ordinary people can't grow cannabis, and it's very difficult to get medical cannabis. You can get it for certain medical conditions, but you then have to buy the approved form for that condition. Say if you've got epilepsy, there's a TGA-approved cannabis extract, not the whole plant thing, for that disease or condition, sorry. And you'd be looking at about $26,000 a year for that.
Wow.
And what person can afford? If you're sick, you probably don't have a job anyway, and you might even be homeless.
Yep.
There's no way you can afford that. And when I was standing for the hemp party, a person with multiple sclerosis, shook my hand and said, "Great that you're standing," because he had actually gone through the horrendous amount of paperwork to get a legal prescription, but he couldn't afford it.
Yep.
So he then had to grow his own, and then he was arrested for that and convicted. It's just so sad. So if the council, as a corporation, it can have its own farm, it can provide the cannabis at nearly cost price, it'll be great. And the council used to have an immunisation clinic in City Hall.
Yep.
So they've had medical stuff there before. It's not really that hard.
I joked with you earlier, before the other guys, before we hooked up on Skype and before Paul arrived, and I said, I'd made some joke with you, digging you about your crackpot ideas and something like that. And you made a reference to how you'd gone in the state party. So you ran in the federal election for the Senate.
Yes.
How'd you go? And as a hemp party candidate?
Yeah, there were two of us, and we got over 50,000 votes. That's an eighth of a Senate quota. And after preferences, it was a quarter of a Senate quota. So it's a very important. There's a lot of people that are really concerned about this issue, and the problem is none of the political parties have got it as an issue. They're all really scared to do anything about it. So the important thing for me is that people need to stand up and run on that issue and a few other ones, and then society will change. The politicians that don't take it up as an issue will get kicked out.
Yep. So before we get on to some of your other policies, let's find out a bit more about the man, Frank Jordan. So you've got a refugee story for me, you said?
My father was a refugee. He came to Australia as a refugee. He was a Polish peasant, a teenager when the Germans and the Russians invaded Poland. He was in the German-controlled part, and eventually they took him to be a slave in a Nazi labour camp in Germany.
Right.
So, and after the war, he couldn't go back to Poland because it was controlled by communists, and they had a policy of anybody that had been to the West needed to be wiped out before they infected the people behind the Iron Curtain. So if he'd gone back, he would have been killed.
Right.
So he came to Australia, and I'm here.
And you were born here?
I was born here, yes. My first home in Brisbane was a tent in the Wakefield Migrant Centre.
Right.
I feel like,
That's as Brisbane as you can get.
Yeah, and it was almost a refugee camp. So wow.
Yeah, and so clearly based on your first policy, you're some sort of crazy radical lefto sort of character.
I'm a very sensible person.
Yes,
Trevor.
Well, how many sort of groups and parties have you been in? Do you want to say or not, or whatever you're comfortable in saying?
No, all I'll say is that I'm a rational thinker, so I get into a lot of trouble because I work things out, look at the evidence and come to a conclusion.
Yes.
And that just gets you in a heap of trouble.
Yeah.
I made a comment about Bettina Arndt, and My goodness, I got into a lot of trouble for that.
Yeah. You know, I was talking earlier about how our little group that met at in the City Hall library,
Yeah.
and just amongst that group, it was a really interesting group of people who would go with the left side, the right side. It just depended on where the facts lay and what was. We just didn't have a fixed bent. We were prepared to look at things quite dispassionately, and
That's
we
exactly
weren't-
what attracted me to the
Yeah,
group.
it was a really good group. And,
I enjoyed that.
and
It's-
your experience, is you've obviously got lots of sympathies with the left side of politics, but you're
Oh no, I've
but you're prepared to
sympathies.
open your mouth and say, "Well, hang on a minute, it only goes so far on this particular issue," and then
Look,
yeah.
I have sympathies with both sides.
Yes.
Like I was one of the few people that organised an anti-Russian
Yes.
demo
Yes,
when BLP Peterson was in power.
an anti-Russian
Demo.
demonstration.
Yes.
Why Russian?
Yeah.
Oh, they had some of the people I was writing to had friends in Russia that were political
Oh, I
prisoners.
see.
Right. So
And that got me into a lot of trouble with my lefty friends because I was supporting American imperialism.
was that in the days when it was hard to get a permit to protest? Did you have to get a permit or?
Oh, yeah, you had to get a permit. I didn't bother, but...
Oh, right. Okay. But you didn't get into trouble for that because
No,
you were
no.
protesting the Russians. So Joe would have been quite happy with that.
The political police weren't were just totally blindsided. They were-
Right. But you got into all sorts of trouble with your leftist Marxist friends.
yeah.
Right.
Oh, well, the Marxist friends, well, some of them weren't friends. Some of them would say, look, after the revolution...
Comrades.
Comrade, after the revolution, I'm personally going to put you up against the wall and shoot you. So, yeah, I'm... yes, if you think for yourself and look at the evidence, you get into trouble from everybody.
Yeah.
It's true.
Now, if you do get... Sorry.
At least you get into trouble with some people.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, let's face it, most people tend to be tribal in their political loyalties.
Yeah, that's right. It is tribal.
And if
thing.
you deviate from the tribal position, you cop
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that's what I liked about our meeting that we
Yeah.
used to attend in the secular party at Brisbane Library, because we could take positions based on, as you say, a rational position, a rational assessment of the facts, rather than trying to please the left or please the right or please whoever.
Yeah, and people disagreed with me. Well, oh
And
my
that's
God.
why I tend to sort of say I'm not going with the left or the right. I'm just following what I think is a rational position.
Yeah.
Scott, I'm conscious that because you're on Skype, it's hard for you to chip in. Did you want to chip in with anything, or I'll just keep going at this stage?
No, you can keep
Okay.
going. That's no problem at all.
Yep. Now, we'll intermingle our examination of your life, Frank, with just an examination of some of your policies.
Oh, God.
And
There'll be so much
Let's,
trouble.
let's move on to policy number 2.
Policy number 2.
But before we do, so this I've taken from your Facebook page,
Yes.
where you had policy number 1, policy number 2, policy number 3. Are these roughly in the order of importance as you see them?
Well, they're all important, but the ones I'm personally interested in most are the first 3,
Sure.
because I think they will make the most difference.
Okay. Policy number 2, build a council-owned electric vehicle factory.
Yep, everybody's sort of thinking about coal. I'm thinking about oil, and it's very easy to build electric cars. They're not that hard. You look under the bonnet of a petrol car, and there's carburetors and all sorts of weird things in there which you don't need for an electric car,
Yes.
and they'd be a lot cheaper to build as well. And there's nothing to stop the council from starting a factory,
Right.
and I'm pretty sure they'll make a heap of money as well.
I think the buses are made locally. I
Yeah,
think
buses. Yeah,
council-
I've seen the signs on the buses. They're made locally.
Maybe they could start with an electric bus.
Oh, look,
Is that more difficult, is it?
I did talk to one of the people in the transport department about buses, and
Right.
it's a complicated
Oh, it's not so
area.
simple. Right.
No, but it's
An electric car is simple, but an electric bus is not so simple.
yeah, and there's a lot of politics and stuff attached to buses.
Right. Okay. Policy number 3, build the Aboriginal Cultural Centre. I will ensure that the Aboriginal Cultural Centre in Musgrave Park finally gets built. The Aboriginal community was widely consulted, plans were drawn up, but the LNP spent the money elsewhere. So,
Yeah, look, Aboriginal culture. If most people don't know enough about Aboriginal culture. It's totally awesome. It's I have a botanical background, so I know the stuff they knew about plants was amazing. They had cultural ways of remembering all the knowledge that we don't have. We have to write everything down. No, they had it all in their heads, and there's very interesting ways of doing that. And there's so much in Aboriginal culture that needs to be on display. And here we had a whole process that was going to produce a cultural centre where it could go on show, generate tourism jobs. I know, speaking to tourists, and German tourists in particular, are very interested in Aboriginal culture. It needs to be put back on track. It's great. And like my main policy focus is jobs. I think that the best way of making jobs is to do environmentally and ethically sound things like electric cars, cannabis farms, cultural centres. And to me it's so obvious if you look at where you can make jobs that's the way to go. I mean, how many jobs will you have in an automated coal mine? Hardly any. But in an Aboriginal cultural centre, there's heaps of jobs.
On this podcast, we've often made controversial statements in regard to our Indigenous brothers and sisters. It's more in terms of the treatment and of in a rights sense. And we're going to talk later on about the case where people now who weren't born in Australia but who claim Indigenous heritage can now claim that they can't be deported. So that's a sort of a rights issue, but we're all for cultural celebration and exchange and museums and all the rest of it. Absolutely.
Celebration of culture.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, as back to my personal story, like my first language is not English.
Right.
And an Aboriginal couple a brother and sister moved in next door when I was really little, probably about 3 years old. And I was taught English by Aboriginals.
Really?
Aborigines, yes.
Oh, really?
So yeah,
So you
I have a very warm feelings for Aboriginal culture because
Yes, you would.
Did you speak like Ernie Dingo or something like that?
No, no, that's a cultural stereotype. No, so yeah, it's.
Now, you mentioned there you've got a botanical background,
Yes.
and you're known as the butterfly man.
That's right. I like butterflies. When I was young, there was no TV. We had radio, I think, but nothing else. No computers and stuff. So
No computer in your tent.
no computer. The only interesting thing was butterflies flying around. So, and then when I got older, I realised there weren't many,
Yes.
and I found out it was because each butterfly caterpillar needs its own food plant. And knowing a lot about plants, I then tried to encourage people to grow the plants for the butterflies. Set up a butterfly club, ended up with about 200 members.
Wow.
Wrote a book on butterflies, 48 butterflies you can have in your backyard in Brisbane,
Right.
with the native food plant and photos of the caterpillars and butterflies. And I spent 10 years for the club being their sort of project officer and going out to schools and fetes and things, telling people about butterflies.
Right.
That's where I got the name.
Does the club still exist?
Yes, it's still going. You can join it. The Butterfly and Other Invertebrates Club, BOIC. Look it up.
Okay. And there are still 48 butterflies that you could have in Brisbane? Or
Yes, they're still there. There's one butterfly that has gone extinct.
Right.
I actually tried to save it. I wrote a recovery plan,
Yes.
but it wasn't pretty enough. The government
It was an ugly butterfly.
It was brown, basically, brown and orange. And they pointed to the big green, birdwing butterfly and the big blue Ulysses butterfly.
Yeah.
And
I said, what about that one?
they said, these are the ones we've protected.
Right. Right. Not that ugly brown one.
No. So it's probably extinct now, it's quite pretty close up, but it's not as big and flashy. So, yeah.
Right. Okay. Yep. You wouldn't have... Do you have, specimens of these? Was that bad form to keep specimens?
Oh, look, it was an argument in the club.
Right.
I'm pro butterfly collecting.
Yep.
Because most of the information about butterflies has come from butterfly collectors.
Right.
And the main person in our club that provided really useful information was a butterfly collector, Bob
Right.
Miller.
Yep.
He was awesome, and he really loved butterflies.
Yep.
He collected them so he could see them, and you really have to be able to look at them to tell some of them apart
Yes.
closely. So he made me a case of butterflies, which I took around to talk, so I could
Yes.
show people what real ones looked like.
Yep. Alison in the chat room, who you know,
Yes.
says, Frank, what are all the yellow butterflies that are everywhere at the moment?
The big ones are called lemon migrants,
Mm-hmm.
and they come in several forms. There's a pale white one, there's a reddish one, there's a yellow one, there's an orange one. They breed on trees in the Cassia family, like the golden rain, Cassia fistula,
Mm-hmm.
or Cassia queenslandica. And if you look at those trees, you'll see the caterpillars on them at this very moment.
There you go, Alison. Right, very good. Frank. That was just a little test to make sure you weren't bullshitting us, and you know,
Oh,
you
look.
sound like you're legit.
10 years of having the trickiest questions.
So, was there something about Totally Wild? Were you on? What was Totally Wild? You had some Totally Wild stories.
Oh, yeah, I was on Totally
that
Wild
butterflies?
a few times. Yeah, mainly butterflies. One of the presenters had arachnophobia, I think. And
Right.
because my butterfly garden was full of spiders.
Right.
And they said, are there any spiders here? And I said, quick thinking, I said, there are no redback spiders in this yard.
Right.
Which
Okay.
there weren't, because
Yes.
I had gotten rid of them.
Yep.
And so she was quite relieved, and we did the segment.
Right. Okay, Frank. Let's get on to another policy.
Policy.
We'll come back to your life story still. Cultural Centre we've done. Policy number 4, establish a corruption hotline. Are you suggesting that there's corruption that needs to be hotlined?
Well, we'll need to find out. Corruption is a very complicated issue, but we know that the Ipswich Council got sacked. We know the Logan Council got sacked, and whistleblowers tend to get a really they get persecuted. So if we do a corruption hotline, they've got one in Ipswich now. That would be just a first step. There's an awful lot of work to do to root out corruption.
Yeah. The problem with local government politics is that they're responsible for a lot of planning and rezoning decisions, and there's a lot of money to be made by buying land with a zoning that then gets changed to, you know, a residential zoning, and that's one of the problems of local government is that whole sort of land developers can make a lot of money very quickly.
Yeah, but the Labor Party's done things to try and make that harder. The paperwork I had to do to sit as a candidate is I had to sit for an exam.
Really?
Yes, and you have to declare all your interests, whether you were involved in any rezonings, and if you're a property developer, you aren't allowed to donate to a candidate.
Yes.
So the Labor Party has done a lot to clean it up. But I think in Canberra, if land is rezoned, there's a tax on the increase in value of the rezoning.
Right.
So the property developer still gets some of that increased value, but the council also gets some.
Yes. Yep.
So there's a lot of stuff that can still be done, but there has been a lot of done to fix that problem.
Yes. Yep. Just getting back to policy number 6, more butterflies for everyone.
Oh, well.
So I'll make it easier for people to connect with nature.
Yeah, it's nature. It's proven scientifically that connection with nature is good for your health.
Yes.
And I work in a local community garden in West End, and there's a butterfly garden there, and there's also a lot of the normal community garden plants. Yep. And we have 3 kindergartens come and do forest school there. The little kids come and they, make cubby houses, climb trees, build fires, fires in the pizza oven thing.
Right.
So basically you get some experience of nature, but our little park is really well set up for that because, I'm interested in kids and butterflies and nature. But a lot of other parks in Brisbane aren't, and one of the kindergartens said there's a problem with getting set up in another park.
Right.
And so one of my policies is that the special unit be set up in Brisbane City Council to modify parks to make them amenable to having kids' activities, kids' nature activities in them.
Very good, Frank. So we were talking earlier. Oh, Frank, I've never seen you wear a tie or how are you going to cope with the pomp and ceremony of City Hall when you take up the
You
reins?
have to wear a big gold chain too.
Gold. Yes, Trevor, that's the wrong question. You have to ask how City Hall is going to cope with me. One of the first things I'd like to do is actually auction off the gold chain.
Right.
1.67 kilograms of gold.
Is it real gold?
Right.
Yeah, it's real gold. It's not pure gold, but it's real gold.
Right.
And it'd be worth about $70,000, I think. I'd like to auction it off and donate it to somebody like, say, Sisters Inside,
Yes.
who actually could use that money rather than having it sit in a cupboard somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm quite sure if I went down to the reject shop, I could get some suitable bling
Yes.
to replace it.
Yes.
What
And
kind of bling do you prefer?
Pearls, I think. No, all sorts of stuff. Anyway.
And we were talking earlier about your activism through the years, and we were talking about whether you got drafted for the Vietnam War.
Oh, that's how I got into politics.
Yeah.
The younger people probably don't know this, but the government wanted to conscript people and send them off to war. And my father was a peasant originally in Poland, and they wanted to conscript people and send them off to Vietnam and kill Vietnamese peasants.
Yes.
Well, I didn't want to do that. So they had what they call conscription. They didn't want to conscript everybody, so they had a lottery. If your birthday came up, you were put in the army.
Yes.
And I refused to register.
Yes. This is the part that I didn't know. Did you guys know that you had to register?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was only a few years away from it when they stopped conscription.
Yeah.
I was very much aware of it, yeah.
Right. So if you did not register your name, then they wouldn't know about you, and
Not
you
sure
wouldn't.
about that.
Unless somebody dobbed you in. Lots of people went to jail for it.
Right. But lots of people avoided the issue by simply not registering, and when their birth date was called out, they were just left.
Nobody came and knocked on the door.
Yeah.
I was in the Draft Resisters Union, so I was politically organised, but
Yes.
I didn't make it easy for them.
Yeah, I had no idea about this
You're a
registering.
bit younger than we are.
It's a pretty cruel thing that the government did then. You know, they just said by a lottery of your date of birth depends whether or not you go into Kharkiv and whether or not you get sent abroad.
That's right.
I'm the first to admit I'm actually not necessarily opposed to conscription. However, I do not believe conscripts should ever serve abroad. They should only ever be used in Australia. You know,
Home defence.
Yeah.
well, not even home defence, but we could have them out fighting bushfires and all that sort of thing. I just think it's one of those things that the government could look at very seriously and that type of thing, but they don't.
Yeah,
So-
and conscription is still in the law books, so they can bring it back if they want to. They didn't actually cancel the legislation; they just stopped
No, they
enacting
just
it.
stopped doing it. Yeah,
Yeah,
They just wouldn't get away with it now. People would just say no.
I'm not sure.
exactly. That's the whole bloody problem.
I don't think
it's
people can be.
I'm not sure you're right, Trevor, to be honest. If
There will
that-
always be an element who'll sign up.
Yeah.
But there'd be a massive amount who'd just say,
Well-
forget that, I'm not going to.
Yes, but they
join your
also accompany it with the relevant propaganda to
Yes.
make people feel it's unpatriotic not to go along with it.
Yeah, I think people have enough knowledge of what's gone on before in other wars, and I think
Really?
yes.
See, that's
yes.
why I honestly believe that you've got to, if you're going to have conscription, I think that it should be made very clear that conscripts will never serve abroad.
But they
I
always
wouldn't
do.
believe them. I wouldn't believe
that's
them.
right.
I'd say,
know you
no,
wouldn't
I do not
that,
believe you.
and that's fine. You don't have to believe it, but I just think that it's one of those things that the government should discuss. They're never
Why?
going to do it, but they've
Well-
got to discuss it.
Why would we need conscription?
The Australian government
But,
tried to introduce conscription in the First World War and they weren't successful. And yet,
Exactly.
come the Vietnam War, they introduced it. It was successful and people went along with it on the whole.
Yeah.
They did, and initially the public was very much behind conscription. They were very much behind Australia's involvement in Vietnam, but over the years and that type of thing, it did actually wane away.
You may
So
be
that's where
right.
you end up. That's where you end up with this huge moratorium marches and all that sort of thing. But
I may be too optimistic on
I
this.
think you are.
Yeah,
I think you give
you
people
might be
too
right.
much
People
credit,
might
Trevor.
be suck it in. I mean, they voted for Scott Morrison,
Exactly.
so why not vote for signing up for
And they're not out in the
Why not?
streets demonstrating against this religious
I take it back.
discrimination bill, are they?
I take it back. So, provided they can get a good supply of toilet paper, they'll agree to anything.
that is ridiculous.
We'll come back to that, Scott. We're not going to go there yet. We've still got Frank with us, and we'll finish up with Frank's stuff before we go further, diverting further. Policy number 7. Here's one that we'll all agree with: end public prayers in council.
Oh yes,
Absolutely.
it's my attempt to help the Christians, because you know that joke about Christians talk about the Bible and atheists read it. Yeah, well, I actually read the Bible, and I discovered that God does not approve of public prayers, and He calls people that do it hypocrites.
Yes.
It's in the Bible.
Yes.
So I'm going to help these poor hypocrites in the council to avoid going to hell,
Yes.
and I'll just stop the prayers. And
You've got it in your policy here, a quote from Matthew chapter 6, verse 5.
Yeah.
Scott happens to be an expert on Matthew whenever I quizzed him. And you've got here, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray publicly on street corners and in the synagogues where everyone can see them.
It's a kind of virtue signalling for Christians, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Absolutely.
yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in, as an atheist, there's a lot of good stuff in Christianity.
Yes.
And the thing I like most about Christianity is the sense of community.
Yes.
The last pagan Roman emperor, Julian, I think his name was, he said the Christians are winning because they have community and we don't.
Yes.
And that's a strong point of. So I don't try and criticise Christians for no reason. It's just if they do bad things like Scott Morrison does.
Yes.
I criticise them, but there's a lot of good stuff in Christianity as well.
Yes.
Like what? Apart from community.
Oh, you're sounding like that Monty Python sketch. What did the Romans ever do for us?
Yeah, exactly. What did the Christians ever do for us?
Yeah, that was specifically Christian.
Universities.
That was specifically Christian, that hadn't been thought up by other groups
who
before
invented
him.
the universities?
Yeah, but
Got
it's
him.
not as if universities are sustained by Christianity.
But they invented them.
So what?
Did
That
they?
was hundreds of years ago.
Did they invent universities?
Christians, yeah.
What do you define as a university?
Well, like what Oxford, Cambridge,
Right.
Whatever that
The other
French
ones
one's
in
called,
Europe
I
were
can't
started
pronounce.
by religious orders. It's
But
true.
centres of learning
Yeah,
existed.
centres of learning.
But the Greeks had centres of learning.
Well,
you
they
know.
had those forums and stuff,
You know,
and those
and-
parties where they got drunk.
And Socrates and Aristotle and Plato, they had their
And in
groups that
Baghdad
they
too.
would examine life and discuss the matters of the world, and so there was
and
centres of learning.
And where did all that end? It all ended.
Well, it led to the Roman Empire and to Christianity, but it wasn't a uniquely Christian idea to have
No,
a
no.
centre of learning
No, it's
where
not
people
uniquely-
discussed
But
matters.
it's one area where they actually did something positive.
right.
We can't be too hard on them.
All right.
Yes, we can.
Policy number 8, which I think is the last, is what do we got here? Reduce human suffering. So it's about voluntary assisted dying. You will do whatever you can to support that.
I'm not hoping. It's not for me, of course, but I'm going to be grumpy and be really annoying to everybody as long as I can. But I've just seen too many people suffer unnecessarily. It's just cruel. I just can't believe that people could be that cruel.
Yes, and of course, Brisbane's most famous Lord Mayor, Clem Jones.
Yes.
His wife died a pretty tough death, and as a result, money from his estate is used towards funding some of the voluntary assisted dying campaigns.
I have seen none of that money.
Right. And you're not going to?
No, I don't think I will either.
No, but just a little fun fact there, that that's where a lot of the funding has come from, is the estate of Clem Jones.
And I think the current government is going to bring it in. There's some really sort of hardcore Christian groups that like people to suffer.
Yes.
That tend to scare politicians.
Yes.
And they can get 20,000 emails into a minister's inbox on a particular issue and policy. But the the Labor Party brought in the abortion law,
Mm.
and I think they'll probably with a little bit more encouragement will bring in one on voluntary assisted dying.
Yeah, I think they might, but I think it might be too late because I reckon even if they bring it in, it'll have some sort of 12-month window before the first one can take place, and before that window is opened or closed, it's hard to think what it would be in this case. But in any event, within that 12 months, if the LNP gets in, they'll then reverse that before the first one can take place.
well.
So
I
that's
think
my
you're
concern.
actually-
This is my
I think-
prediction.
Well,
I think you're giving Deb Fredlington far too much credit there.
Right. Well,
anyway, if I'm Lord Mayor, I'll be there
good on you.
spruiking for it.
Yes. I've got a theory that when it comes to Brisbane as a district for a council is one of the largest going around. Like
Yes, it's huge.
Yes. So places like Sydney have got dozens or
Yeah, lots of little councils.
lots of little councils that bicker amongst themselves in a sort of uncoordinated fashion. And Brisbane has the benefit, I think, in having a single council controlling a large area, and it's got some of the advantages of size.
Economies of scale.
Yeah, and if they decide to do things, they don't have to negotiate with
lots
a
of
dozen
people.
different councils about certain things. Like, a simple thing like a shopping centre at Bondi in Sydney, the traffic issues that might require consulting with three different councils, because of the connecting roads and things. So Brisbane can just do it. And I've always had, really, no matter what party's been in charge, the actual running of the Brisbane City Council, if I ring up and I say there's a pothole or there's an issue like that, I've always found it pretty good to deal with. And here's my theory, Frank, is that in terms of things like the ordinary running of the council, making sure that the roads are, acceptable, the sewerage works, the water's pumped, and the things that you expect from a council, it's a large, well-resourced public service that's already in place that will do those things no matter who's in charge, really. And here's what I'm getting at, is that somebody like you can come along with these ideas which are unique, and it's not like all that other regular stuff isn't going to just happen because there's professional people sort of doing that stuff already who just keep doing it. Like, you can add some unique ideas here that would never get off the ground.
I could also, in terms of running the council, because I have things to do, I meet council workers in a lot of, bush care stuff and community garden stuff. And there are sort of issues of organisation within council as well that could be improved, that would improve the way the services are delivered. And that's something I'm interested in as well, because I know people that have worked in council and know some of the issues there. Like, large organisations can have problems that make them a little bit inefficient. And they're things I could look at as well when I'm in charge, said optimistically.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Frank, we've run through your policies.
Yes.
And we're potentially going to get into some very tricky areas, which, and I know you've got places to go. You've got babies to kiss and hands to
Hands
shake.
to shake, yeah.
Butterflies to nurture.
Butterflies and moths,
Yeah. So you're going to leave us.
Yes, unfortunately.
And did you have anything else that you wanted to get off your chest? Here's your chance.
If politicians aren't listening to you, don't vote for them. Vote for the ones that do what you want them to do. That's my main message.
Okay, all right. We'll hold you to it, Frank. Remember us when you're famous.
Thank you.
Do we get the first interview when you're Lord Mayor, your first long-form interview, the day after? Can we have
my
that?
God.
Can you commit to that now?
I don't know. I'll probably.
Can we have our own podcasting studio inside City Hall?
Yeah. What are you doing for podcasters at City Hall,
Look,
Frank?
I do have an interest in community broadcasting.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I'll take that request on notice. Because we used to have a TV station, Bridge 31, I think it was, and it's sort of gone on the internet, etc.
Yeah.
I think there's there's an awful lot to be done in community media and community arts, and I've got lots of, there's a whole network of people out there that would love to do stuff on that, and I know some of them, and they can knock on my door
Right.
at City Hall.
Yep.
Just make sure they vote for me.
Good on you, Frank. Okay, take those headphones off and
I'll do a run.
and grab your stuff. And thanks, Frank, for doing that.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I'll send you the links and everything after the show, and you can send it to your 50,000 supporters throughout Queensland, some of whom might hopefully become watchers of this fine podcast.
Yeah. Well, I only need 300,000 votes.
Okay, all right. Okay. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks
Okay.
very much, Frank.
See you.
Bye now.
Great to see you again.
Right, okay, so there we go. There's Frank. He's off. And a relieved Frank. Thanks, mate.
See you, Frank.
That was good. One of the good guys, Frank. Yeah.
There were many good
Yes, yeah.
guys
Yep.
in that Brisbane
Yeah.
library meeting that we used to
It was
attend.
indeed. Yep. Right, gentlemen. So, dear listener, if you're new to this podcast, we traditionally talk about news events of the week, and we just run through the different topics and give our opinions of what's happened and what we think should happen. And sometimes we have special episodes where we talk about discrete topics. So have a look through our back catalogue. Go to ironfistvelvetclub.com.au and you'll see them all there. So, gentlemen, just to get on, just a few matters from last week. Mm-hmm. We briefly discussed Bettina Arndt.
We did.
And just to refresh your memory, dear listener, Bettina, there was that tragedy where a father poured petrol over his wife and 3 kids, and they all burnt in the car. And Bettina Arndt said, "Congratulations to the Queensland Police for keeping an open mind and awaiting proper evidence, including the possibility that Rowan Baxter might have been, quote, driven too far, end quote. But note the misplaced outrage. How dare police deviate from the feminist script of seeking excuses?" So we had a discussion about whether she was really referring to insanity or was it appropriate, etc. All of that was in last week.
She was actually repeating the words of the policeman himself, who was stood aside.
Indeed. So, lengthy discussion last week. But we did get something from Woz, a friend of the show, good on you, Woz, who sent an image of a headline from the ABC News from 2017 when there was that tragedy of the family in Cairns where 8 kids were killed
It was a shocker.
by a mother. And the headline on the ABC News site was Cairns children killings. What drove Raina Thaiday to slay 8 kids?
And there is the word drove.
Yes, similar sentiment.
Very similar.
So I don't recall the outrage at that time when about people saying, "What do you mean drove? What drove her to it?"
I don't think there was any, Trevor.
I don't think there was, but there should have been. But in my opinion, but in your opinion, it wouldn't have been because you would say it was.
I mean, people expressed, I suppose, shock,
Yes.
but also probably a degree of sympathy for the woman because she clearly was disturbed in doing something like that. And I think sympathy is appropriate.
Anyway, interesting that similar use of words and nowhere near the same sort of outrage over those words used by ABC.
If any at all.
Right. In the past week, coronavirus and the economy. The stock market yesterday lost
exploded
7%.
yesterday.
I don't know what it did today.
It went up slightly again. I couldn't tell you by how much, but it did go up a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I heard that...
But it's awful low, though.
Yeah, I heard the last 12 months of gains in the stock prices have all been lost.
Well, I heard, and essentially, the stock market is now at the position it was 14 months ago. Well,
Okay.
That was
Well,
this morning before today's trading.
So it's gone backwards.
But really, that's not a bad result. I mean,
Really? It's a bad result for me.
well,
A person looking at retirement in the not too distant future who's going to be counting on superannuation.
Yeah.
My superannuation account
but
has
I've told you
gone
before.
backwards badly.
yeah, but the stock market is
I've told
supposed
you
to go up
before.
and down.
What did you
Some
tell
extent.
me before?
Yeah, what
I
did
told you before, Paul. What you should be doing is you should be out of those high growth, high risk funds and into a more diversified fund, if not even a capital guaranteed fund right now.
I'm in what's called a balanced.
Listen, do not take financial advice from this podcast.
No,
Seek your
never.
own.
No,
But,
don't.
least
Do
of
not
all
take
from
finance
me.
advice.
But
Shop podcast.
really, if to me, it just shows how booming the stock market was. If it was up something like over 20% in 14 months, that's
Is that
ridiculous.
necessarily a bad thing, though?
It's unsustainable.
How do you know?
Well, historically, it's unsustainable.
No, that's not true.
Well,
I
20%
believe-
a year
I
is
think
per.
you've got to look at the average of it all. And if it's been up 20%, now it's down 14%, so it's down to sort of 6% across that time. I don't think that's that bad. You've just got to look at the average return, that's all.
No, but Scott, it's down to where it was 14 months ago. So it's as if
Oh,
you're
no,
in the same position you were 14 months ago. And
Absolutely.
I'm just,
But over
as you're
time,
sold
stock
and that
prices
sort of
do rise.
yes, but over time,
And they also go backwards.
but I'm just saying it's not that bad because,
It's bad for me.
yeah. But anyway, I mean, people are claiming it's horrendous, but at the end of the day, how many houses would you buy? Well, it'd be quite often the case that you'd buy a house worth $1 million, and 14 months later, it's still worth the same amount. Like, assets don't necessarily have to increase by 5 or 10%
I think
every
you're
year.
looking at the position of a person who's already well set up in life, which I'm not.
I'm trying
And there must be a lot of other people out there like me
right.
who are counting on their superannuation account seeing steady growth.
Well, you cannot count on shares having steady growth. That's not how shares work.
I don't have any shares.
Well, yes, you do via your superannuation
shares,
fund.
your superannuation
It's your
fund.
superannuation fund is invested in shares. So if you can't count on steady growth from shares, that's the whole point of shares, is that they are higher risk, and as a result, they go up and down, and
Yes,
it's part of the deal.
But the whole
buying
point
shares.
of superannuation is that people contribute to it over the lifetime of their working lives.
Not 14 months.
And no, not 14 months. And obviously, I've been in it for longer than 14 months. But
Yeah.
when you are reaching the sort of near the end stages of your working life,
Yes.
you do certainly hope that it's going to go up and not down. And sadly,
You just have to hope that over the years, there's more ups than downs, but you have to
And there has
expect
been.
downs. Yeah.
and there has been. But there was a couple. I think about a year and a half ago, there was a big dip as well. And of course, back in 2008, 2009, there was a very big dip.
Yeah. All I'm saying is it's not so bad. And you're disagreeing with me, as usual. Man. But
It may not be so bad for you, Trevor.
Yeah.
You're a lot further away from retirement than I am.
I don't think it's because of selfish reasons. It's because the way you have
It is
to
on
view...
my part.
Yeah,
it's
but
very
that's what I'm
selfish
saying. You have
reasons.
to view. You cannot expect shares to increase every year. You have to accept that some years they'll go down.
Of course, I accept that.
Yeah, and if you could, there's been far worse plummets over time than to be just where you were 14 months ago.
Yes. Look, I totally take your point.
Yeah.
But the point I would make is coronavirus is something that didn't have to come along, and probably no one saw it coming, and that it was a shock to the whole system.
Yes, it is. Yeah. We said after the 2019 election, it's sort of consoling ourselves when Morrison won, was maybe this was a good election to lose. Do you remember that?
I don't remember you saying that, but
Scott, you
I remember him
that?
saying that, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think he said that there could be something around the corner that could knock his surplus over and kill the economy.
Yeah. Yeah. Because basically, historically, what had happened in recent times was the Conservative side was in power during the good years, and it was financial crisis would come along whenever Labor got in power, and it just seemed like maybe we were due, and maybe.
people are even suggesting, people are saying, so what will the Morrison government do? Will they do as the Rudd government did and try to stimulate the economy by giving money away?
Yes.
And it's hard to imagine a Liberal National Party government giving money away as the Rudd government did.
Yes.
However, they may well try to stimulate the economy by injecting money into infrastructure or other things.
Yeah. Well, here's the point I want to make about the whole.
Well, we're going to find out tomorrow.
Right.
Are we?
Yeah.
They're announcing their stimulus package tomorrow.
Okay.
Right. It'd be interesting to see how they do it. So there's two. Well, here's think of different ways they could do it. The Rudd government, for example, just handed out a lot of cash to the people and said, go spend it.
$900 for every person who had paid tax, I believe.
And I was involved in some stuff at the time where we went to some trade fairs and there were end users, consumers there. Holy smokes, was that a successful trade fair? Like the tills were ringing like crazy. Okay. It really did boost things. So, or the other thing that they could say is tax cuts as a means of stimulating the economy, because you can't cut interest rates anymore. And what I wanted to get to was one of the most influential books I've read in recent times was The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. And what she was, the premise of the book was that neoliberal economists and activists like the Institute of Public Affairs have got a wish list of things that they want in terms of lowering taxes, cutting red tape, and getting special privileges for big business. And when there is a crisis, that's when they can say, we want these things, and governments can more easily give them because, oh no, the stock market's crashed, this has happened, we're really in trouble, let's provide 10%, let's carve off 10% off the tax rate for corporations or whatever. And then that's in place, and 2 years later when things have settled back, you can't go, it's very difficult to say, oh, things are better now, let's have that 10% back. Like, they're experts at lobbying for their special deals when there's a shock in the system. So, as an example, in America at the moment, the Bank Policy Institute, which is a Washington-based lobbying organisation, has released a set of proposals, one of which is that the Federal Reserve lower capital requirements to zero, which means banks could lend an unlimited amount without having any assets or wealth to back it up.
Wow.
I.e., to stimulate the economy, let's let banks lend willy-nilly. We need it because of this crisis. And it's not just in America. So, reading The Australian, dear listener, prominent businessman Tony Shepherd said tax relief and investment incentives should be on the table for all businesses, along with a pause in new red tape. Quote, as it is, private investment was at a long-term low before the crisis hit. He says a holiday from new business regulation at all levels of government would inspire confidence. A wind back would be nirvana. He said tax relief would be essential for those on lower incomes. Perhaps they could have a holiday from compulsory superannuation, giving them a well-needed 9% pay hike at zero cost to the budget. Mr Shepherd, who conducted a commission of audit into federal finances for the Abbott government, said regional assistance should be focused on bushfire and drought relief. So these are sort of systemic changes which neoliberal advocates will try and pump for while our system is in shock, and that's dangerous, as opposed to short-term things where you say, well, here's a discrete bunch of money, once that's done, it's done. So
it's very short-term thinking, though, isn't it? Because, you know, well-off people will still be able to save money. It's just the poor people who will be told, you don't need to save for your retirement anymore.
Yes.
Just spend it now.
Yes.
It will go into the economy, but down the road they'll be worse off. Whereas the better off will still be saving money anyway, and still will be well set up for retirement.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
This is a government that's refused to do anything for New Start, even though John Howard, of all people, has said it's time to beef it up. This is the obvious thing that you would do, would be pump some money into the New Start allowance, because guess what those people are going to do?
They spend every cent of it.
Exactly. It'll be interesting to see which way they jump, and I'm saying to your listener, when the details come out, ask, is this a systemic change that's really part of the shock doctrine, or is this a discrete short-term thing that isn't going to create a systemic change? Judge it by that.
Well, I did hear this morning on the radio that one of the things that was being discussed was the possibility of just dropping money in the bank accounts of those people that are on New Start and their pensions, because they're going to spend it all. The other thing was also on the table was some sort of investment allowance for business, which, it sounds all right on first blush, but then you got to realise is that every time you give away investment allowances, blah, 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 none of it finds its way through to people's pay packets. It all goes through to the boss, and he ends up getting fatter and richer on it.
Yep. So, anyway, we'll see where that ends up in terms of the economy. The other thing, of course, dear listener, just briefly, what's happened, not only the coronavirus, but oil. So OPEC was in negotiations with Putin over oil, where they were trying to agree that they would reduce, mutually agree to keep production levels low and therefore prices high, but they fell out, couldn't agree, and have now both said, well, we're just going to
Pump
pump more oil into the system,
So
which
the price
will
has
drop
gone
the
down.
price. And so all of these stocks that are related to those industries have plummeted. And that's the other sort of trigger as to what's happened here.
How does it help the oil producers to have prices going down? Just selling more volume, is it?
I guess the Saudis are worried that the Russians will sell all of their oil and the Saudis won't sell any. So they don't, and they want the money now. Because actually Saudi hasn't saved much money, like they've wasted it, as you'd expect. So they can't afford to let the Russians take over the market. So it's a case of, it would have been in their interest, like with the OPEC oil crisis, for them to agree, but they just couldn't
It's puzzling,
agree.
isn't it, that Putin, for whatever reason, couldn't find common ground with them.
Well, he knows it's going to crunch America as well, because America's got this shale oil industry and it's slightly more expensive to produce the shale oil, and there's a huge industry has been built up around it, and that's going to be just kaput now. So with cheap oil, he's created a massive headache for America. So he'd be laughing about what that's causing. So that's part of the trigger, along with coronavirus. The other thing that coronavirus is doing, of course, is playing havoc with holy water and other...
Indeed.
That was hilarious, yeah.
And holy sites all around the world, or
Yes.
at least in the major
We
religions.
spoke last week about holy sites where they were licking the relics and things as a normal practice, and they've been saying, stop doing that.
Please
Yeah,
stop.
so now Catholic Church has urged, or basically instructed, the various parishes not to have basins of holy water.
And Holy Communion. They're going to. They're not going to have a common chalice of wine being passed around,
Yep.
and
Yes.
something different in the way they distribute the wafers as well.
Yes, and even Lourdes, where the sick have travelled from all over the world to bathe in the waters there and get their miracle.
And share their germs.
Yes, the authorities there have announced that it's going to be closed.
Yes.
No bathing for sick people.
Look, let's hope it.
So
at
that's
least,
showing a lot of faith in your miracles, isn't it?
Let's hope it at least sort of makes people think a little bit more deeply about the power of their so-called faith.
Yes, yeah, yes. And quoting the Lord's decision, the officials were quoted as saying, our first concern will always be the safety and health of the pilgrims and the shrine's working community.
And because we know God isn't doing anything at all to protect them.
And as a precaution, the pools have been closed until further notice. Oh, dear. Yeah.
It's hilarious, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Right.
He's absolutely hysterical.
Yeah. Now, religious discrimination issues. Apparently the Muslim community is pleading for more protection in the religious discrimination bill. And Attorney General Christian Porter is sympathetic. He's carefully considering, because according to the Muslim community, it has never felt this unsafe following the first anniversary of the Christchurch massacre. And they've called for anti-vilification measures, etc. I just want to say that as an atheist and pro-secular person, I've never felt more unsafe. Don't worry about the Muslim. Like, my legal rights have never been under more
The Muslims
threat.
are in one of the safest places on the whole planet for anybody, including Muslims.
Yes,
And they're claiming to be unsafe. Give me a break.
yes. Here's the disappointing bit. Federal opposition leader Anthony Albanese has written to the Prime Minister urging him to hold a national multi-faith service on March 15th.
That undermines my faith in the ALP
Yeah.
as a party of a secular political system.
Yeah. So join up with me and make change from within. Paul.
Good luck.
Yeah. Good luck. Yeah. It's a worry, Scott. Like already,
It is a hell of a worry because you've got the lunatic right that are just behaving like complete lunatics. I mean, Christian Porter is a nutcase. I always thought he was one of the more sensible members of the government, but he clearly is a nutter. And then you got the ALP out there making nonsense claims that you should have a, what do you call it?
multi-faith ceremony.
Multi-faith ceremony. It's all a load of nonsense.
Let's have a ceremony without atheists.
Secularists
But yeah, let's
of
have
all stripes.
let's have a ceremony without atheists. That'd be a great way to improve things. That's essentially what he's calling for.
Yeah.
Give me a break.
Well, I mean, he had that thing where he discussed the he had a, what do you call it? He consulted with
He
a whole
consulted
group
with
of-
stakeholders, and there wasn't a single atheist amongst them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Didn't ask the rationalists, didn't ask the Atheist Foundation, didn't ask the
Yeah.
humanists, didn't
Apparently
ask any
they
of
don't
them.
count.
Yeah,
Exactly. It's really sickening.
I think this Labor Party is going to roll over. That's why.
Well, that's a hell of a worry because we've already had that message from that one woman in Sydney, I believe, who said that she rang Albanese's office to give them a blast when it was reported that he was considering handing over the Religious Discrimination Act to the government.
Right.
And she got assurances from Albanese's office that it was all just politics and that sort of stuff and that they weren't going to back it.
When you say the Labor Party is going to roll over, I have an image in my mind of the Labor Party in the person of Anthony Albanese lying on his back asking the religious leaders to scratch his tummy. He's already rolled over.
Yeah, or a dog in a fight that's ready to concede and does so by
There's no fight in
rolling
that
onto
dog.
its back and saying, "I'm done. I give in."
There's
Yeah.
absolutely no
That's
fight
what
in that
That's
dog.
what it looks like. So that's
I
a
mean,
worry.
I would love Julia Gillard back.
Oh,
Although
Scott, she gave in to
She gave in too, but at
the
least she-
Australian Christian lobby and
did.
sucked
I
up
know.
to them as well.
Yeah,
So,
you're right.
Yeah.
You're
Do you know
right.
who I
You're
heard
right. So-
speaking? I heard Tony Burke speaking in Parliament.
Well, he's a practicing
And-
Christian as well.
Yeah, he spoke very well. I've said there's no salesman in the Parliament. I think he could be a salesman. I'm not sure of his positions,
What, used cars?
but to sell a story. He actually spoke really well, the bit I saw.
I've
I'll
never been very
keep an eye on
impressed
him
by
anyway.
I have to say.
Okay.
Well, I
Keep
thought
him-
he was actually quite an impressive speaker.
You don't like
know.
AOC either, so you know.
No, I don't.
Yeah. Hey,
Although she's better looking than Tony Burke.
oh, 12th man. Right. Just briefly, I don't know if I sent you this one, but our Queensland Police Commissioner, Katarina Carroll, has set an ambitious target to reduce the crime rate by 5%, which she says is achievable under a major restructure. The Courier Mail can reveal Ms Carroll's plans to reach her aspirational target by focusing on demand and preventative measures and by officers focusing on crimes that threaten public safety, such as stolen cars, break-ins and assaults. I look at that and I have to go, what a load of rubbish. Police commissioners and police don't reduce the crime rate. Like, the crime rate is a function of our
A
society.
whole bunch of things.
Exactly. And you just...
Education,
Yep.
social safety net, employment,
Yep.
Good public services and facilities. It's
Yep.
a whole complex
It's complete...
interaction of a whole bunch of things, isn't it?
complete bunkum for a police commissioner to say, I'm going to reduce the crime rate by 5%
good
with extra
luck.
police. Like,
Good luck.
the crime is generated by a whole host of factors
It's too
outside the
complex,
power of a
yeah.
police commissioner. That's just a worry. It's just saying,
Shows how really undereducated they are for the role. You know, they really don't understand what their place in that complex system is, do they? They just don't understand.
Yeah, you want to, do you want to reduce the crime rate by 5%? Open a cannabis thing that Frank was talking about, and bingo.
Stop arresting people for victimless so-called crimes.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yep. And
educate people better, give them jobs so that they don't feel alienated from society and go out and start breaking the law.
Yep. Yep.
There's a whole bunch of things they could
this
do.
Sort of gung-ho thing by concentrating and cracking down on this, we're going to reduce crime. Just give me a break. That's
It's a load of garbage.
Sorry, Scott?
It's a load of garbage.
Yeah, it's like in America, they reduce the crime rate by building more prisons, and locking more people away.
Yeah.
And does it work? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Also, on a similar topic, Queensland Police Union boss says parents of youth offenders should be stripped of welfare payments.
Oh, wow.
Wait, where do we get these people from?
No idea. Any ideas, Scott?
Christ.
Where do these people come from?
No, Laver's his name, isn't it? Ken Laver?
I don't have his name in front of me. That sounds about right.
I thought it was Laver. Right. And he was a friend of the bloke who was one of my referees. Mm-hmm. And you just think to yourself, a union boss that sounds like he's on the wrong side of it all. He's very much a Tory.
Doesn't sound very sympathetic to people who are doing it tough in life, does it?
No, not at all.
Oh, just some examples of leadership. Bring on Frank for Lord Mayor, I say.
Why not bring back the workhouse, you know?
Yeah. All right, we're getting to the end here. Do we want to talk about terra nullius and that High Court decision and about the citizens?
We talked about it last week a little bit, didn't we?
I've got some notes here, dear listener. This is the decision where we had some people who were born outside of Australia who claim to be of Indigenous heritage, who then said that as a result, the government cannot deport them because they're not aliens. And so they would be treated differently from somebody who was not an Indigenous person.
It was as if they had some sort of spiritual connection with the land.
That was their argument.
Even though one was born in Papua New Guinea, the other was born in New Zealand, they have some sort of invisible connection to the Australian landmass.
Indeed. So, in the decision, the High Court was split 4-3, and the Chief Justice was one of the dissenters who said, complete nonsense.
Did he?
She.
Oh, she?
Yes, said complete nonsense. So, I'm going to try and explain this in 3 minutes, so when you're around the water cooler and discussing this with friends, you can get a grip of it. But basically, when white men came to Australia, it was declared terra nullius, meaning there's nobody here. And the way the legal system worked was, if a colonising group moves onto vacant land that's unoccupied, then all of the laws of the parent country, if you like, apply to the new country, holus bolus, instantaneously. If, however, it's deemed that the land has been settled by some other Indigenous culture, so it's already occupied, therefore not terra nullius, then the laws of the existing local community will apply until they are, unless there is a coloniser's law that overrides them. Yeah. So when I went to law school, terra nullius, Indigenous people had no rights. Afterwards, Mabo decision came along, which said, no, in fact, that's wrong. There was an existing culture here of people, so their laws apply until the colonisers' laws abrogated them, superseded them. So, in terms of land that would have been already distributed to farmers, for example, and had been allocated, residential houses, that was land which the European settlers had made laws in respect of, and therefore those laws stand. However, there is land in Australia which has not been touched, and therefore there's been no superseding law. Therefore, the original Indigenous laws regarding land ownership survive because it's just unoccupied Crown land, therefore the previous laws apply.
But what if there were no Indigenous people living there either?
Okay, then there would be no Indigenous land rights. So if you had some land that was Crown land that had never been given away to farmers or settlers, you then look at it and say, okay, is there a title for Indigenous people here? And that would require an examination of what was the Indigenous laws at the time. And part of that was, did this tribe of people have a connection to this particular block of land? So the connection of a tribe to the land was an essential requirement to work out to see whether native title could apply. And what this case has done with the citizenship thing has said, Joe Bloggs, born in Papua New Guinea, who identifies as an Aboriginal, says he has a connection to the land and therefore the citizenship laws do not apply to him. And it's a completely different question because our constitution and our lawmakers have already made laws superseding about citizenship. So whether you have a connection to the land or not as an Indigenous person can only be relevant for land rights. It's not relevant to citizenship issues. And this is what the Chief Justice said. And it just blows my mind that a majority of the High Court could look at it differently. And when you're reading the judgment of the Chief Justice, she says things like, these arguments are based on a wrong premise. It's not the traditional laws and customs which are recognised by the common law. It is native title, which is the subject of recognition by the common law and to which the common law will give effect. She says something here. At the heart of the plaintiff's case is the erroneous assumption that the connection to the land necessary for recognition by the common law of native title may be used in an entirely different area of the law. Its use for such a purpose is wrong as a matter of law and logic. Pretty tough words, I reckon. Here's my point. The Pell case is coming up for appeal to the same High Court. Anything's possible.
It's tomorrow.
Absolutely it is.
Is it tomorrow?
I'm not sure when it is, but anything is possible. So when you've got a High Court that's split like that, on an issue like that,
it's hard to predict.
Anything is possible. I really wouldn't be surprised if. And I look at the Pell case myself, and I'm not sure how I would judge it. I think he's got good grounds.
Do you have any inkling as to why the majority of the High Court judges found in favour of these foreigners with an alleged connection to the land?
I haven't had time to read all of it. I don't think I will find time to read all of it. Somebody else can inform me.
Don't you get the feeling they're kind of social justice warriors in sitting on the High Court bench, feeling that they're doing some kind of, right thing for the Indigenous people because they've been so hard done by in the past?
Yeah. Alison in the chat room says, I think the Citizenship High Court decision was more about the vibe than the law. So
yes, sounds like it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Alison. Yeah. So
and the vibe's important.
Yeah.
to some people.
Anyway, anything is possible.
What's your vibe around Cardinal Pell?
I think he'll get off. I don't think they'd take. I don't think they would have taken the case on unless they intended to do something. That's just my gut feel. But
There you go.
but who knows with this court? So we'll see. Right. There's lots of other things we'll get to next week. Afghanistan war would be a good one, seeing the US is pulling out of that. And we can discuss.
How many years they've been there now?
Oh, goodness me.
2001? Did they go in
so
late
19
2001?
Yeah.
Oh, well, they went in 2002, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's been leaked papers
They've been there for 18 years.
that show that all along the US government knew it was going disastrously, but spun a different story. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
It would be very hard to ever be optimistic about actually winning
yeah.
a war on the ground in a country of
But our leaders have
that
continually said, "Oh, we're making some good progress."
And they made all sorts of promises about lifting the condition of women and girls, improving education, all kinds of promises were made. And then, within several years, they were all forgotten, pretty much, weren't they?
Yeah.
They just walked away from it.
Yeah. Alison again in the chat room says, "My vibe for Pell is that he will not succeed with his appeal." Okay, Alison, let's hope. Right, gentlemen, did you have anything pressing that you wanted to throw into the mix before we sign off? No?
No, not from me.
Right.
No.
Okay.
How's the toilet paper situation in Rockhampton, Scott?
Yeah, how is it?
There was none when I went out there on Saturday. It seems to me we are a couple of days behind the fever pitch in Brisbane.
When you're saying none, no toilet paper.
There was no toilet paper. Yeah, it was all sold out.
Try IGA is my tip.
Well, I wasn't going to. I didn't need any, but I just thought I'd go down for a walk, and I couldn't believe it that the store had been picked clean of the stuff.
Indeed.
It was incredible.
Well, Coles and Woolies, my observation, Coles and Woolies have been stripped bare. I went into IGA on Sunday and there was a mountain of toilet paper on sale.
Right.
And nobody rushing to buy it.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, it's a sad state of affairs when people are told, "Don't worry, toilet paper is manufactured in Australia.
It is.
We have more than enough."
Although we lost one truckload in a fire.
Yes.
In a fire.
Yeah. Captain Doomsday, one of our Patreons, senses a conspiracy because of that. But, so, yeah. Anyway. All right, dear listener. Well, that's it. I think Frank was well spoken. Yes. And maybe we can reach out to other Lord Mayoral candidates and see what they've got to say. And who knows?
Worth a try.
Yeah. Look, the wheels of the Brisbane City Council will march on. The potholes will be filled. Water will run through the pipes. And if Frank's there, all sorts of interesting things will happen as well. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Righto. We'll talk to you next week. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Yep. Thanks for tuning in. Bye now.